I know one brother, he's involved in like Muslim scouts and stuff like, working with young people, and he said an increasing number of young boys, they've started to use very kind of maybe misogynistic language in the way they start now talking about women, even in their own families and stuff.
For us, it's a swear word now. The word feminism is a swear word. So what are you fighting for then? Well, I'm fighting for, I want a better paid job. Okay, so how are you going to get that? Is feminism going to give you a better paid job? No. There's a smoke screen. It's just one term, and for me it translates into entitle. Misogyny is a very cruel, silencing word, and it's designed to be that. As soon a man or a boy has a voice, and that voice doesn't put women first, or is not saying something that women want to hear, they are misogynists. Right, this is a message for women, okay?
Okay, what's your message for women?
So my message for women, Muslim or non-Muslim women, is that you assume that a behaviour when you alienate a father from his child doesn't mean anything. But what it does to a man is it absolutely breaks.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to today's Unscripted podcast. We have another special guest for you today, is Sister Sally-Anne. She is the founder of an organization called Split the Difference, which is a human rights organization that looks to address inequalities in legislation, guidance and policy for men and boys. Very interesting. Assalamu alaikum, Sister.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you very much for joining us. Just for benefit of the audience and myself, can you just briefly outline what it is you do at Split the Difference, what your research interests are?
Okay, so the start of this was in 2015-16, and it started with me creating a whole family domestic abuse service centred around the children through funding from the Police and Crime Commission in South East Wales. That project sent me on research that I'd never done before, and it was because of the standoff of female services that didn't want to see a whole family domestic abuse service that allowed men to be perpetrators and victims, and likewise with women. So we did an event in the Welsh Government, in the Welsh Assembly actually, and for that event I had to do some research I'd never done before. And it ended up in 12 months research in the UK, looking at legislation, guidance, policy, and fiscal spending, but how services were delivered in the UK. Sat back in chair and thought, oh my God, the UK's got it wrong. This is crazy. And then ended up doing a further 4.5 years research in Australia, America, New Zealand, Canada, some Arab countries, some African countries, and some European countries. Basically, I did a broad spectrum view of the world where I could find policies in English or legislation in English and guidance. I ended up backtracking towards the UN because I was noticing a common narrative. And I was thinking, where's this narrative coming from? And I thought there's got to be a central point for this.
So you were pulling on a thread, and it took you all around the world, basically, back to the UN.
Yeah.
What was that thread? What were you interested?
Well, I was actually looking for best practice because I realised the UK had got it wrong, and
got it wrong in what? Sorry.
In its ability to support men and boys with their needs. So things like domestic abuse, education, homelessness, 87% of homelessness in the UK is men or boys. And services and support mechanisms for men and boys was non-existent in comparison to women and girls. So I realised the UK got this very wrong, and that needed addressing. So instinctively, because I'm used to delivering services, I wanted to look for best practice. So I ended up looking at over 15 countries internationally, couldn't find it anywhere.
So there's a pattern all over the world where you're saying male victims of certain things like domestic abuse, homelessness, what other things?
So I in the end I had to I had to be very careful because wherever I looked, I saw inequality, wherever I looked. So I ended up having 13 areas. So they include things like family court, criminal court, health, domestic abuse, the basic human rights legislation and guidance, equality legislation and guidance, education. I think I've repeated myself now. So there was 13 areas, and I looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, most professionals in some context, if you're in educational services, knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which means we meet the basic needs of a human being. And I figured if I focused on what men were struggling with the most, and which would allow them an environment where their basic needs were met equally, then I was hoping the rest of it would unfold and naturally follow. So
it might be surprising for some people to hear that some of the basic needs of men and boys, biological or societal needs, are not being met in England.
Well, they're not, and I think, I mean, there's a time when you do research like this, and there are a lot of other people doing this now. There's a lot of professionals now. When I started, if I said to somebody, I'm trying to support men and boys with their needs and they have no equality in services or fiscal management, people would say to me, Sally, why are you trying to support men and boys? And now,
you're a traitor.
I'm a traitor.
Yeah.
I'm a traitor. But now most people who do the work that I do, over the last 2 years, we're noticing a complete change. Lots of professionals, professors, doctors, academics, frontline service delivery. We're noticing there's an environment is getting different now. And I mean, yes, everybody is still shocked. But what I realised was, when you do research like this, you reach a point where it feels like the Twilight Zone. Because everything in society says that women are the ones who need equality. And when you do the research, you reach a point. For me, it was about year 3.5. And I for 6 months, I sat back in chair thinking, what's going on? This is crazy. Everything that I believed through delivering services, procurement, government strategies I've been part of, some of them I've chaired. And you think, this is crazy. This is not real. Nothing's real. And most people who do what I've done in the research, they get to that point and they think, okay, what's going on? I don't understand. That point there, you can become very critical. You can be, particularly about women, because this extreme feminist narrative that is turning women into victims, there's a reason for that. But you start to realise, well, I need to have a different kind of narrative. And you want, I mean, I tell this story regularly, but I remember sitting in a coffee shop next to 2 women who were not saying the nicest, kindest things about their husbands. And I wanted to swing around and I wanted to give them every single piece of data that I had accumulated and research I'd accumulated, stats and evidence in one go. So you get very passionate about it. And then I realised that most people don't know. Unless you're a man, and even men don't understand, but most people didn't know. And when you get to that point, then my heart softened a bit, and I was thinking, we need to educate.
So what are the kinds of things that most people don't know? Like
Okay.
maybe something shocking, because the out there in the kind of cultural ether, the narrative, the understood kind of reality is women, especially in this part of the world, have historically been oppressed. Men have been oppressing them. There's this thing called the patriarchy, kind of playing devil's advocate here a bit.
Okay.
And women have systemically and from pre-eternity been oppressed, and only recently, because of Western liberalism and enlightened superior values, they've starting to claw back some rights against the evil men who've denied them the vote and treated them as property. And there's a kernel of truth in that, isn't there?
You certainly know what to say to get me feeling like, okay, let's start. Some stats and some evidence. Last time I looked at homelessness, 87% of homeless are men and boys. Some of them are just barely 16. That is not just in the UK. The figures are very similar wherever you look, okay, in terms of Western cultures. They're very similar. 191 countries across the world hold the highest suicide rate for men and boys. The youngest documented is 6 years old. There are no services available. I know why that is. domestic abuse currently, the figures, and again, something that's quite weird is it's a third of the documented cases. So, a third of people who experience domestic abuse are men. And again, you'll see commonality around that around the world. There's common figures, okay? Education, let's talk about education. Everywhere you will see, we need to educate women and girls, okay? And they will look at developing countries, there's lots of grants and there's lots of support for those things. Universities have departments where they're supporting women with education. They're trying to get in 50-50 in STEM subject classrooms. I've done the research. There are more men and boys not in education across the world. 30% of boys in UK education are failing. 20% in further education, more like are dropping out. And men and boys
compared to women.
Compared to women and girls. I mean, I could keep going about the differences. I mean, in the UK, we have the NHS system. In the NHS, we have preventative cancer treatments for cervical cancer and for breast cancer. Two killers for men that are gender specific is testicular cancer and prostate cancer. They could get preventative exploration, but they don't. They have to be symptomatic, and unfortunately, with prostate cancer, once you're symptomatic, you're highly unlikely to be cured. So
clearly, this is your work, so you've done a lot of research, right? And I'm not kind of disagreeing or anything. Just for the sake of kind of, I guess, probing a bit further, not in an adversarial way or anything, but can't someone say that, look, historically, men have been the ones who've gone out and been eaten by lions or whatever, or had to go and hunt, zebras? What do we used to hunt? And gone out to the mines and battlefields and war and that kind of stuff. Naturally, the norm in society actually is for men to put their own lives on the line and put women first, put their women folk first. This notion of, the gentleman or the chivalrous person, or Islamically the notion of ghaira, of having a kind of protective sentiment over the women of the tribe and the society and that kind of stuff. So isn't it normal for even male doctors and policymakers to put women first?
Yes, it is normal, and I think this is where the wrong narrative comes alive. I think the perception is that men and women's roles historically. I mean, my research went back 2,000 years because in the last year. I didn't
know they kept records that long.
Well, they did. I looked for female leadership. And I looked at what it was like living in a home 2,000 years ago. I mean, one of the wacky things I discovered was the word feminist was created by a French theorist in the 1600s who believed that the only way that you could have a balanced, thriving society was to have the opinions of men and women within that society. So he promoted that women should always have a voice in governance. And there's areas in America, actually in the US, that implement his theory and run their governance in that way. So there's small pockets that still run by him. So I looked back 1,000 years because I was looking, the feminist voices, we are suppressed, we are controlled, we are this, we are that. And I wanted to see, is that real, So
okay, so your qualm is not, why aren't there more women committing suicide? Your qualm is, why, despite the evidence on the contrary, is there such a broad, widespread narrative that women are oppressed and the victim and so forth? Is that correct?
It is. I mean, when you do the journey that I've done, and anybody that's doing that right now, you start to realise that narrative is not real. And it's not just not real, it's not something that women need to be seen as. If you ask generally, if you ask a woman, are you a victim? What ends up happening is they sit forward and even when they have experienced something that is very negative, nobody wants to be seen as a victim. And society, by saying women are victim, they are almost suppressing women from being the best version of themselves because they're always fighting. They're constantly thinking they've got to fight and battle. There's lots within that narrative. I mean, victimhood, it brings negative connotations in a workplace. I'll give you an example. I've got women who they've worked in a job for 2 years because their board is saying we need to get more women in certain departments. Men who've worked there 15 years and have done their time and they've worked through their stages and shown and proved themselves. Because of the society is seeing this victimhood, and we've got to give it's almost entitlement. Well, it's not almost, it is. As a woman, we're entitled now. You know, we have to be, because we have to be seen to have what we need and want. It's not real, though. And for women like me, I left school when I was 15 and a half, and lots of women like me did. Went into work, studied all my life. If somebody gave me a job just because I'm a woman, I would feel absolutely insulted. Because I stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock, working, you know. I work, I do my due diligence, and I work. Women don't want to be seen that way, but there is a layer in society where it suits it to have it that way.
Why do you think that is?
I think most things, in extremism, there is always, for me, and there's some very famous people that will tell you this and know much more about this. It's normally power and money. Power, control and money. And feminism, unfortunately, that's what it's seeking. Feminism now is not, I mean, for me and for lots of women like me, we talk about this regularly. For us, it's a swear word now. The word feminism is a swear word. It has no connotation in anything positive any longer. And it means basically, you know, it's become something that says you're a victim and you're entitled. You know, it doesn't say you're balanced and you want equality for all. It says you're a victim and you're entitled, and I certainly don't want that identity.
So how would you define feminism then? Because this is something that, I mean, sociology teachers, for example, they might even, you know, teach their kids, not kids, their students rather, in the classroom or at school or in university or whatever, not even to use that word, but say feminisms, right? Because it's not, maybe there's no one clear, coherent kind of definition, I suppose, of it, and some of them are some forms of feminism or concretization of feminism are so extreme in their mutual exclusivity. You know, they would go to war with each other. So, what does feminism mean to you, and do you regard yourself as anti-feminist?
That's a very good question. Yes, I would class myself now, with the research I've done, as anti-feminist. I don't believe there's anything positive about this word any longer. And I think if women want to be seen to be educated or working to be the best they can be, they wouldn't want to be identified as that. Well, the women that I work with don't want to be identified as that.
And how would you define it in summary for? Because I mean, many people just say feminist just means, you know, they want equality.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the ones who are trying to keep the authenticity of what it means, which means to have equality and balance for everybody, and that they represent that. That's the nicest version of the definition. For those who are in position of power, it's become a tool that they engage with other women to fire them up to say, we are feminists and we need to stand up and we need to be accounted for. You know, that's broadening towards the more extreme element of it. For me, I see young girls. You know, I've got granddaughters, and she's 13 and 18. I've got 2 of them, and I see them buy into this narrative. And on one hand, it suppresses them, so they're always feeling like they're always going to have barriers. On the other hand, they started getting ready for the marches we used to see, you know, in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of feminism, all this kind of activity. And they felt that they needed to do that. And they have, on times we've had deep discussions about this, on how it affects them. And I said to them, do you feel a victim? I'm not a victim. So what are you fighting for? I'm fighting for equality. What does equality look like for you? Well, I want the same education. Are you stopped from having education? No. Has the school ever stopped you? No. So what are you fighting for then? Well, I'm fighting for, I want a better paid job. Okay, so how are you going to get that? Is feminism going to give you a better paid job? No. So what are you fighting for? There's a smoke screen. It's just one term, and for me it translates into entitled footsteps, and I don't agree with it.
I mean, one of the things you've probably been following, unless someone's been under a rock in recent weeks and months, is the rise of kind of certain personalities that might be considered or you know, anti-feminist kind of macho kind of displays of being against feminism or being against some might argue even anti-women, or misogynistic or whatever. What do you make of this rise? Do you think it's a reaction to feminism, or why do you think so much it's gaining so much currency? I mean, I know one brother, he's involved in like Muslim scouts and stuff like, working with young people, and he said an increasing number of young boys, young men, adolescents, they've started to use very kind of maybe anti women, misogynistic language in the way they start now talking about women, even in their own families and stuff. And sometimes I wonder that whenever Muslims wander into debates amongst kind of the broader society of non-Muslims, kind of cultural wars and feminists versus red pill versus this and that we end up kind of just adopting certain un-Islamic or anti-Islamic narratives or ways of doing things, and in turn kind of turning a young man who within an Islamic paradigm would have a great sense of ghira and jealousy and respect and a dignity over his womenfolk, over his home, his society, his tribe back in the day. Now he maybe begins to refer to them in public as using derogatory language and that kind of stuff. What do you make of this rise in kind of these displays of macho-ness and
So one of my trainings is psychotherapy and life coach, so people and behaviours and how they position themselves and how they develop. I mean, lots of people will talk to you about, the pendulum has swung one way and then it's more likely to swing back the other way. And I think to some degree that would happen. There is a movement now that is standing up for men and boys and is saying what's going on. The social media, things work at a very quick pace now. I think that we've got a society that the family... an example could be that in a family court setting, when two parents walk into that setting, the family court is predispositioned to support women and girls more. So families crack and break. It's not easy to get 50% care of your children if you're a man. So we know that families, I haven't brought those stats with me, I don't believe, but I think it's around 70% of people in prisons and things like that were brought up in single families, particularly men and boys. The identity of a young man now is very skewed and it's very bombarded by this, you're a misogynist, you're toxic. I mean, this toxic narrative that's been, it kind of escalated. I started noticing it about 4 years ago, and it was like a bushfire. You could hear it everywhere. Boys are constantly listening to toxicity. In the schools, these young men...
Do you mean the things that they're listening to are toxic, or they're being described as toxic?
They're being described as toxic. The narrative for them, misogyny is a very cruel, silencing word, and it's designed to be that. As soon as a man or a boy has a voice, and that voice doesn't put women first or is not saying something the women want to hear, they are misogynists. And it's very good at silencing men. I think these terms are very much out of date now. They need to be abolished. Boys growing up within those terms now, toxic, you're toxic. In the school environment, I was part of a project approximately 7 years ago. I was the chair and a trustee of an organisation called the Welsh Restorative Partnership, and that was designed to go into schools and to look at positive relationships with young people and children. We've got women's services going into schools now, and they're promoting boys treat girls better. You don't see girls treating boys better. The society that's wrapping around this women and girl narrative and not considering men and boys is in every area of a young man's life. But isn't it
the case that most women who are, for example, victims of murder and violence are the victims of men that they know?
Yes, but I mean, those stats in itself, I mean, if you want to talk about murder, there is more men and boys murdered than there are women and girls. In a domestic setting, yes.
But is it girls murdering women murdering men, or men murdering women?
So in Northern Ireland, because we've had a conference in Northern Ireland Instalment on the 18th of November. So out of 9 murders last year, 5 of them were women murdering men.
Wow.
So they were higher, you see. Naturally, they are lower. They are lower in the UK, but in the UK, so in Africa, domestic abuse in Africa, there's more men murdered than there are women.
Men murdered by women?
Yes. So some of the countries I looked at were African countries, so the stats are different there. So regardless, for me, it's regardless of that. Society has an overarching governance, and it can't allow itself to get involved in that. It has to provide the same services, because by its very nature, it's in servitude to the community, you know. And I think what's happening with all of these projects that are running to get positive relationships, get women and girls respected, whereas previously, probably around 6 to 8 years ago, you wasn't seeing that narrative in nurtured boys that were in school from the age of 3, 4, 5, 6. You wasn't seeing these narratives. Now you're seeing them.
What kinds of narratives?
So things like, you know, there's a blame and shame in there. So when you go into the school and you talk about positive relationships, a lot of these projects are run by women's services. So the narratives are the responsibility of negative relationships in the home are placed on boys. So they're trying to teach them better skills, communication, but not paying any attention to that coming back reciprocally the other way. So you've got young boys in 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds who are now being very influenced because they're being told that they are the cause. You are the causation, you know.
So they kind of absorb this and almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
That's my identity. That's who I am.
That's who I am.
I'm a misogynistic person who hates women.
That's who I am. And you call somebody or something a dog for long enough, and that's what it'll become.
So talk about law of unintended consequences, right? So you're actually creating, arguably, the very thing that you're warning against.
Exactly. And young boys, their identity for a long time now, in a society that has had very strong feministic views. Their identity, I mean, I talk to men all the time, and, you know, they bought into this thing, all I am is somebody who goes out, earns a wage and comes back home again. I'm in constant servitude, you know, and I don't get the respect that I'd like to have, you know, that I give. And they've been silenced. I mean, you ask a man, what do you think of the term, if somebody says you're a misogynist, what would you do? And they're like, what can I do? It's hard.
Delete those tweets.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So, this is a loaded question, obviously.
That's okay.
Are men oppressed?
I honestly believe they are. I think unless we start, particularly now with young boys, I understand completely why they're following strong masculine voices. You've got broken families, young men that are growing up in single parent families. I mean, one of the things we know, there's lots of research now in Oxford and actually in America looking at why men are needed in the parental home and what they bring to developing children, both men and women. And one of the biggest things they bring is resilience. They bring resilience on decision making, being able to get up and stand up and move forward when they've had their knees chaffed or something's hit them back in their life. So young boys are looking for leadership, and they're looking for voices that are saying, you're a guy and you're okay, you know, you're masculine and you're allowed to be masculine. And I think it's going off on tangents, and it needs to be understood. It needs good, strong figures in place for them to be able to identify with, you know.
But surely, I mean, in the last few years we saw the Me Too movement, for example, and you know, lots of instances of sexual harassment and harassment against women and girls kind of seeing the light of day, so to speak, on social media. What do you make of that? Isn't that an example of, there's a lot of ways still to go to educate men and boys to not sexually harass women?
Absolutely. There are some very broken men who have grown up in an environment where they've not had the opportunity to be the best version of themselves, and that is an education that I think should be existing. but we don't give the same to women. I've had women come to me, and they literally, when I was studying my journalist degree, one of the staff in the university came up to me and she pulled me to one side because she knew that I was supporting men and boys. And she said, I need to talk to you, and broke down in tears sobbing, because she said, her words to me were, I absolutely batter my husband. And he never, ever instigates it. And I've tried to get help. I've been to charities and things. I've tried to get help. We have no women support, no female support for things like that. Now, with boys and men and these sexual violence, what we know is that men experience domestic abuse and sexual abuse. The pathways for them to disclose that are not open like they are for women and girls.
Also, there's like a social stigma, I guess, that they suffer in silence.
There's a massive social stigma. And I think, I mean, we've got, in Northern Ireland, we've got projects if you look at domestic abuse, because domestic sexual abuse, we can say, the stats say that there are a third of the population are men that experience domestic and sexual abuse. The funding, they get less than 1% funding. Wow. For those services. So there is no services. A woman presents anywhere, even Boots Chemist or some of the banks, and as soon as she says, I'm being abused, she will be taken to one side, she'll be rescued. And there's services that will wrap around her instantly. Now, on average, there are 7 services that will respond to that report. For a man, there are 2. And that's even not considering it's going to take him. One man who phoned the helpline in Northern Ireland, he'd been experiencing abuse for 60 years. It took him 61 years.
60 years.
It took him 61 years to report abuse. For others, the national average is 31 years. For a man to report sexual violence or domestic abuse, the average is 31 years. So yes, I understand, we do need to educate people about self-control and sexual behaviours, but it is an illusion if you think that women are not participating in that behaviour. Yeah.
What is... I came across this term, and I don't know if you would call yourself this, or if this is like the more quote-unquote toxic kind of masculinism or something like that.
Okay.
Is that the opposite or to feminism now?
Yeah, I think it's probably, it seems to be growing. They try, it's a narrative that will grow. This is why I think now
you've said, if you make the case that men are oppressed, we need a men's liberation kind of thing. So I wouldn't go that far. It's all going to start again, isn't it?
Because you guys have your power, and in my experience, while I've worked with men who have gone through some horrendous experiences, and as a result they are offending. You talk to guys in prison, there's a reason why they're in prison. They will have experienced some form of abuse to get in there. People don't grow up at 5 years age and say, when I grow up I want to be a drug dealer or I want to commit crime. There's a journey with that.
Well, depends what kind of music they listen to and stuff.
Well, I think that's just a self-development. I'm pushing the boundaries and I want to listen to the music I want to listen to. But I think we are in a state where we need to visibly be seen to be supporting men equally, or you will get that pendulum effect.
So just to rewind a bit, you pulled on this thread and you found so many instances of men effectively being oppressed or not receiving adequate services and policies and legislation for their suffering in some circumstances. And then you pulled on this thread and you found, wait a second, it's going all over the world, and then you got to the UN. So what happened then?
So in the UN, I was looking for the source. I'm used to working with legislation and guidance, So I was looking for source. So I looked at a number of different conventions, Human Rights Convention, equality stuff, the different influences to each country. And then I came across the Istanbul Convention.
Okay, what's that?
So the Istanbul Convention, the UN Women was created in 2010. We have no UN men. And then in 2011, the Istanbul Convention was created, and countries were asked to ratify it, which basically means that there's a set of principles, and countries are asked to adopt those principles and show that they are working towards them. And that's been in place since 2011. I read this, and there's a policy guidance called CEDAW, I read that. I cross-referenced them with the Children's Convention, human rights, a few other things. The Istanbul Convention is to prevent violence for women and girls. Now, the European Council, when it created and participated in this, it stated that countries should also include men and boys in any work they did in relation to the Istanbul Convention. They've never done that. They don't do that.
It's not in the it's in the convention and it's not acted upon?
It's not in the convention. It's mentioned as an additional caveat, if you like.
Okay.
That countries should enable men and boys to be included in the policies they create from that, or the legislation they create from that. Mm-hmm. That's never happened. The legislation, I mean, for some of your viewers who don't know, legislation normally is ambiguous in gender. It doesn't really state or support one gender. But when you come away from legislation, you'll start seeing commonality threads through the guidance. Mm-hmm. Then how it translates into policy could be completely discriminatory. And that's what's happened with the Istanbul Convention. Now, we have a number of countries. It's quite, it's quite a strange thing. Istanbul Convention, Istanbul was the first to ratify, and they were the first to leave the convention. And there are a number of other countries who are also preparing to leave the convention, and the justification for that is that they believe that it's causing conflict in the family and it's pulling families apart, it's causing competition.
So what does it say then?
So it basically says that all the focus around health, well-being, there's lots of things within it, because it talks about serving the minority, it talks about providing education, but basically it's telling countries you need to protect women and girls at all costs. And
isn't that a good thing?
It is a very good thing. I think, having something that makes policy be aware of protecting women and children in developing or developed countries is very good, except for we don't have the same for men and boys. And for me, I mean, most people who are balanced, you want to see an issue. So there's homelessness is an issue, domestic abuse is an issue, and you want the legislation, regardless of your gender or your culture or your colour or whatever, that legislation will serve equally. It will have, governance will have understand roughly how many people in its communities are experiencing these issues, and it will provide services appropriate to that. I recognise that men and women are different, and we need different approaches, In our conference in Northern Ireland, we had one of our guests, actually the Mental Health Commissioner for Northern Ireland was one of our speakers, and I had a trauma specialist. When men experience trauma, because one of the things that you'll find in service will say, Sally, we know that men and boys suffer these things, but they don't talk to us, they won't tell us. My instant comeback it is, then you're not asking them the right way. You need to prepare your services to ask them the right way. But men, biologically, when they experience trauma because of who they are and how they respond, it shuts down a part of their brain that allows them to formulate language. So there are reasons why men find it. Now, we know women, women can talk. It does. So women find it very easy. They talk. It's easy for us to communicate. We're used to it. So in terms of things like the Istanbul Convention, when you don't put something in place side by side with that for men and boys, then you've committed a crime as far as I'm concerned. And anybody who's balanced and cares about their men, they would say the same. Well, they do.
Does it? So is the Istanbul Convention bothered with families, or is it something else that's tearing families apart? One of
the strongest things that's coming out at the moment is a great narrative, and it's the biggest challenge to the Istanbul Convention. And I think for me, it feels like organisations are looking at this and now starting to justify why it's wrong. It doesn't say women and children; it says women and girls. Okay, so what about boys? 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, So the narrative for this convention, it completely locks out the ability for men, for boys, women, and it's a huge... I've noticed this is gaining momentum in the news. Sorry, I may have gone off on a tangent with your question there, but...
So the Istanbul Convention is not directly concerned with the family. It's something else, tearing the families apart. What is that thing?
It only serves women and girls.
You were going to say that. You were saying something that there's a competing narrative gaining currency now.
Yeah, there is.
What is that?
I think there are the countries. I think currently, the last time I spoke to our human rights lawyer, I think there was 7 countries that are considering withdrawing. Istanbul already has, but there are another 7 countries that are preparing to leave the Istanbul Convention. And I think after it being, they ratifying it for, well, it's 11 years now. We've gone out 11 years. So so communities can see the effects of having a total focus on women and girls. And there's been outputs from that. There's outcomes from that. So, for example, in the UK, when a woman's experiencing domestic abuse, in refuge, in women's aid, in the hostile environment, when women are lifted away from that abuse and put into that hostile environment, some of the charities from the age of 8 refuse to take boys from the age of 8. Some are 10, some are 12. I think the oldest is 14 currently. So society is seeing the effects of an only focus on women and girls. And the thing about the Istanbul Convention, it has a footprint in every single piece of legislation. So I looked at 21 acts of law in the UK and the guidance from that and the services. So because the Istanbul Convention is based on protection and looking after, policies within housing, family court, criminal court, policing, the judiciary system from the start to big at the end, fiscal management of how we send out grants there, education. There's a lot of money and a lot of shifting to only focus on women and girls. So we're seeing things like in the family court and children's services. What we see is, I and services that are trying to support men and boys, we're seeing consistent behaviours where men, as soon as they are part of that system, there is an assumption straight away that they're the perpetrator. They have to prove they are not a perpetrator or even a victim. So I think countries are noticing this, and they've recognised that families are being, there's no
And in
solution.
your research, in your investigation, you've boiled it down to this Istanbul Convention.
Without a doubt.
Okay.
I call it the atomic powerhouse of inequality. Without a doubt, it is the one single convention that has stripped the ability for men and boys to have support. All fiscal management and all risk management goes towards supporting women and girls.
Yeah. Okay. SubhanAllah. So I mean, and that's how things like suicide, things like homelessness. So if a woman's if there's a refuge for people with homeless people, because of the legislation, the woman will be helped or the girl will be helped and housed somewhere, and as a result, that's why you get more homeless men.
So I mean, you just got to look at the figures, okay? So the figures state that we know the figures are not correct, okay? We know that, I know that. In fact, some health figures are now leaning towards domestic abuse being 50-50.
Wow.
In part of my research, I connected with police stations, some in England and some in Wales, and I made direct questions to police officers, and I said to them, in your assessment, do you believe, what do you think the rate of domestic abuse is in terms of women and girls? And most of them told me it's 50-50. One of them in England said that they think it's 75% is women against men. Now, I don't know whether you know...
Are these male officers, though?
No, mix. They were a mix. No, they were a mix.
It could be that they...
No. I had a period of about 6 months or whatever. I was seeing police officers. I was asking individuals and chiefs, and I did a bit of research. One of the things that really shocked me, though, their policy is if you were my neighbour and you heard a large noise and you phoned the police, when you phoned the police and you said there was a disturbance, you may be somebody who doesn't like me and there's just some meanness in play there. When the police turn up, if there's no noise or sound or no history of anything going on in there, when the police arrive, when they leave that property, even if it doesn't look like anything's happened there, they have to choose who is the victim and who is the perpetrator. Really? They have to choose one person.
Wow.
They have to. They cannot go back to the police station, even if they've got...
That's a bit stupid.
Even if they can't witness, they don't witness, there's no other reports, there's no evidence. They have to choose who is likely to be the perpetrator, who is likely to be the victim. And because of societal narrative that says men, toxicity, all of this, men are perpetrators, women are victims, a lot of the police officers go back and they choose the man. So there's a misrepresentation of stats, you see. So yes, lots.
So I mean, so you spoke about you spoke about homelessness and legislation and suicide and mental health and services and stuff, but you touched on parental alienation and the breakdown of the family.
Yeah.
So we did this campaign a few years ago. We found as soon as the pandemic hit, I mean, it's natural, people getting on each other's nerves, right? being locked down and stuff. But we found we were told that there's a marked increase of cases where children are being used as weapons amongst disputing kind of parents. And at the time, we didn't have any kind of messaging with regards to it's happening. The perpetrators are men or the perpetrators are women. We launched a campaign with many other scholars and imams across the country that put yourself in their shoes. You look at it from the children's point of view. The bond between a child and parents, both sides of their family, is a sacred one. No one has the right to disrupt this sacred bond except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. with some kind of due process. If there's sit before an Islamic advisor and say, look, this is the reason why she or he shouldn't be allowed to, or that side of the family is harmful to the child, whatever. But in the absence of a due process being followed, the default position is both sides of the family have to have a meaningful relationship with a child. And when we went public with that campaign, even though it was completely kind of gender neutral, so to speak, because it was more about parent and child and so forth, we found lots and lots of brothers coming out saying, look, I haven't seen my kids for 6 months, I haven't seen my kids for 10 years. Brothers that, we know they're in the community and they've been suffering in silence almost. And we also got a lot of kind of backlash, even though the messaging was completely neutral. A lot of sisters actually complaining, saying, what is this about? This is, offensive and blah, blah, blah. Even though it was simply about, we tried to find the lowest common denominator that everyone can agree with, which is, think of the children, basically. And this is where we were our eyes were open to even more the phenomenon of parental alienation. So what is parental alienation, and does it happen? What are the statistics when it comes to fathers and mothers, if you're aware of that?
So the statistics vary from situation to situation, okay? And there's lots of reasons for that. Parental alienation does exist. There's a massive amount of research. Women's services will call it a pseudoscience. It actually is not. They're from qualified psychotherapists, psychologists. And the physical effects of parental alienation on the child are very much real. And some of those physical effects can be seen within the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. We can see some of those effects where we see that, I think it is 70+% of men in prison come from single parent families, haven't seen one of their parents. So sociably, we see the effects of that. Physically, we see the effects of that. It is real. And anybody who, trusts
it's almost
in
a self-evident truth that if you separate children from their, a parent, one parent or another, or part of their family, there's going to be some adverse impact on them. You don't need to really prove much of that.
Parental alienation is it is something I feel really passionate about. My parents got divorced when I was 9 years old. I didn't see my dad until I was 38.
SubhanAllah.
So and it was difficult to build that relationship. Now I have a lovely relationship with him. I love that we're connected. My brother didn't experience an easy life because of that. So I have knowledge of it on a personal level, but the services that I delivered right the way from the beginning of my career has always had me connected to courts, family court system and criminal court system. And anybody that works in frontline services will understand and know and see it every single day that parental alienation exists. It is not only something that happens within families, but it is supported by the services that support them. So things like children's services, family court processes, assumptions that men are the perpetrators and women are the victims. There is a lot of narrative in there that just packs it. It keeps packing it. So for me, it is alive, it's kicking, it's there. It's been there for 30 odd years that I've been working in a career. But there's
so this long before the Istanbul Convention?
It was long before that. There's an assumption that women are the better providers for their children, and therefore, you know, they can nurture. There's historical, social and emotional factors that have come into play with that. Science has moved on from that now. We know, for example, in Oxford and in America, we know now that as soon as a child is born, okay, and I'd really like to spend some time just explaining this.
Yeah.
As soon as father becomes a parent for the first time, within 2 weeks of that child being born, his testosterone level would have dropped, all right? His brain functioning would have changed. He will have developed more. There's an area within the front, the fight, flight or freeze zone that would have developed more. His hearing would have become heightened. There's lots of things that go on. Women historically have always believed my body changes. We have this thing around, you know, it's all happening within me, and therefore, you know, there's almost like I should have more consideration or ownership with that. But in actual fact now, with science, we know that it's exactly the same for men, right? So men are equipped to
Exactly the same?
It is. There's one factor. So if you look in America University, they did a 10-year study. And some of the experiments they did, it was a psychological study. Some of the experiments they did, an example is they put 10 babies, different babies crying. This is 2 weeks after the child was born. And then they asked each parent to find their baby's cries. Okay, I mean, they're very simplistic, but they're very meaningful. Mum and dad had the exact same responses, right? They were able to identify their baby's cries exactly the same time. Things around nurture, chemical responses when a baby's crying, stress levels, you know. And the interesting thing for me was in this study was they didn't only do this with biological birth fathers, they did it with foster fathers and adoptive fathers. Same with adoptive mums and the same response. The body responds to the agreement to be a parent, right? So and testosterone levels never go back up for a man. They're done. They stay there. That's it. It's finished. You know, you are a fully fledged biologically changed man. You're a father. So we know all of this stuff now. So when you come to parental alienation, the belief system that says a woman is more likely to be able to look after and respond appropriately to their child is not true. And it's one of the areas that I am very passionate about, because the damage that it does to the child is it strips a child of its identity. It disables a child from understanding who they can be. And where men are concerned, the studies have shown that the rough play that a man will experience with both his children is a very key component that allows children to be resilient. So when life knocks them down, and they've got massive hurdles, it's that relationship with the father that lets them believe they can get back up again. Now, it's interesting that 70% in prisons are men from single parents. The resilience, I'm an ex-drug therapist, so the resilience within men to be able to say, well, you know, okay, I've had, you know, I've committed this crime, or I've something's knocked me down, my grandmother's died, stuff like that. There's no emotional resilience there or mental resilience there. This is what I saw in drug users. There's no ability to believe that they have what it takes to get up and step forward. It's very evident. So for me, with the parental alienation, and I am very strong with this, and if the ladies want to counteract my narrative, they can. When you get married and you have children, regardless of who you choose to marry, whether you're a man or a woman, you have children, and that person is going to be in your life until your child is 18 years old. And I understand that some partners
hopefully longer.
Hopefully longer, but the ex-partner in this relationship, they will be in your life 21 if you're still paying for education, but you married that person, however you did it, Islamically or whether you're any other faith, you married that person, you created a human being, you have a responsibility for that child, and you can't justify not allowing that other parent. I've seen parents who are drug users and have been absolutely excellent nurturing parents. I've seen offending parents who have been absolutely excellent parents and have always put their children first. So I agree that, you know, if you've got a parent or extended parental family who are hurting that child and harming that child, this is a different game. But if you've married that person, you don't want to be with them anymore, you have a child with them. And as far as I'm concerned, you don't exist in that, your child. Yeah. Because if you don't take care of your child and allow that relationship with the other parent, your child will become broken in one way or another. And some of the ways we see, lack of confidence, lack of attention, they mix with the wrong children because their identity is stripped away from them.
I mean, it's important to note as well that this is particularly the case in our modern world where the family is an atomized tiny unit. You know, if it was 1,000 years ago or a few hundred years ago, pre-modernity, where, you know, even if a husband dies or you know, there's a marriage breaks down or whatever, and technically, you know, in one little room there's only one parent, like a mother and raising a son, that's not a single mother. Right? It might be kind of fashionable to say, you know, so and so was raised by a single mother. No. That person, that woman and that child still existed within the rubric of the clan, the family. They had hundreds of people who would be considered as part of their family. This is way before the nuclear family was invented, and human beings were atomized and split up into, you know, into tiny units whose relationships were modulated by, you know, state interruptions or corporate entities or anything like that. So it's important to recognize that this is even worse now than it was, what that would have ever been, and it's getting worse probably because of the breakdown of society and the further atomization of human beings into lonelier and lonelier kind of discrete units instead of being part of a wider tribe or a clan or
exactly.
or a family.
The support networks around there. I mean, there are fathers are very, because I understand when one parent passes away, it's a different story, and when you've got a grandfather or an uncle that can step into that, be the negative and the positive, be the controlling, you know, responsible person, but also be the positive and somebody that reaffirms positivity. But if you've got a father that's there and is somewhere in the peripheral, and that child doesn't know that father, there is always going to be a part of it that's missing. And one of the ways children interpret their father not being missing is that they have no value. As a child, I don't have any value. Nobody cares about me. My father doesn't care about me. Yeah. So that is a very... I
mean, lots of the literature, I've just dabbled in it, and it just kind of, not in any professional sense, but just looking at what's out there. There's so much out there about the impacts of that. I mean, we had a brother, Ali Jaffrey, write for us sometime and see about how this is often, and there's a growing kind of number of researchers who are saying this as well, that this is also the seeds of kind of same-sex attraction as well in men, because they felt an alienation to their own masculinity when they were younger. They didn't have you know, that much of an involved father. Not every case, but you know, they felt a distance between them and their father, and as a result, they just paraphrasing here, they had a sense of mystery and you know, elusiveness and jealousy even against masculinity. And when, you know, by the time they're finding out, whereas naturally they would have a level of a point where they would separate from their mother and have a kind of understand their own, as a boy, understand their own identity as a male, as something distinct from their mother. Because that's a bit delayed, it kind of crosses over with the period where, you know, sexual pubescence and sexual maturity and stuff like that. So that's a lot of where kind of same-sex attraction for men comes around, according to this brother who wrote this. He runs an organization, you know, helping Muslims kind of talk about and deal with the unwanted kind of types of attraction and stuff like that. So there's so many issues from. But I noticed that when I asked about parental alienation, you went straight to kind of the father not being there. Is that what are the statistics? Is it
Well,
50-50? Is it mostly men being absent?
No, it's mostly men. I haven't got the statistics with me because some of my statistics I've revisited, but I haven't done them recently. For sure, it is mostly men that are not. I mean, I've got a project at the moment with the Child Maintenance Service. We are preparing ourselves to take legal action. And about the Child Maintenance Service and the illegality of the delivery of their services. But 90% of the paying parents are men. There's a monetary, this is why I'm saying to you,
90%?
90% of the paying parents are men in the Child Maintenance Service. So
can you just explain for me,
yes, okay.
what is the Child Maintenance Service?
So the Child Maintenance Service is a department under the Department of Work and Pensions that is specific to taking child maintenance payments from one parent, from the paying parent to the residential parent. And 90% of the paying parents are men. So 10% obviously are. Some women are working better paid roles than their partners, or they may have their children for longer. And the department is designed where there's contention between the parents. It's designed to be something that can be an arbitrary service that will take the money from the non-resident, and where it needs to, it will follow that through with court and supportive mechanisms to get the parent, whatever man or mostly men, to pay for the upbringing of the child. That service is 30 years old now. It is a very what we've seen. It is a very broken service. I've never in my whole career ever seen a department that is so dysfunctional as this.
Wow.
Its causes in terms of deaths in society. If you are attached to the Child Maintenance Service, there's 1,030, I think it is, additional deaths within that, and we know a lot of them are suicides.
Wow.
And it's the way the management system of this service is happening. It's taking money that it shouldn't be taking. There's lots of brokenness in that, and we've got a court case that we.
So sometimes I bump into brothers and they open up about this story and they say, look, I have to pay £2,000 a month just to see my children. Is that what you're talking about here?
Yeah, so what happens is women, unfortunately, and I say that because 90% of these cases are that. Women are, in the cases that we're managing, and in fairness, we do have second family mothers that are supportive of what the work we're doing. So when parents get married again and they've got a second family, they are being forced into poverty because of this service. But 90% are men, so I will say that. But what we are seeing is there is a monetary gain for a parent, for a mother, to not have her children seeing the father within the Child Maintenance Service. So what we're seeing is the children are very much weaponized around money. If you don't pay the money, you don't see your child. And there's too much of this, which is horrendous. But the service itself... and
you're taking them to court?
We're prepping to take them to court. We've got... I sent a report into the Select Committee last week, because they've got a Department of Work and Pension Select Committee. I sent a report into them last week. And I've been working on this for 14 months with a group of volunteers, and we are preparing. We've got a number of cases. Some of the DWP actions, they've pretty much gone against most of their legislation, policy and guidance, so the way they're operating goes against their own structure and legal structure.
Okay, so we'll be following that closely. We'll get you to maybe write something about that and keep us updated, inshallah. Yeah, all of this stuff you're mentioning, is it putting men and boys off marriage?
That's what we're hearing. That's what we're being told. And in fairness, when they say it is based on fear. I mean, for women, right, this is a message for women, okay?
Okay, what's your message for women?
So my message for women, Muslim or non-Muslim women, is that you assume that a behaviour when you alienate a father from its child doesn't mean anything. But what it does to a man is it absolutely breaks them. It rips the heart of who they are out of their body, and it spins them around. They become dysfunctional. They don't want to work. They don't want to sleep. Nothing they can think of during the day means anything, because the only thing that's in the front of their mind is what are their children doing, how are their children. There is a biological link between a father and his children that needs to be satisfied. Otherwise, these men are destroyed. We see men committing suicide because they don't see their children. It is an absolutely horrendous thing to do to a parent. And for me, I know women, if they knew what men were experiencing, they wouldn't do what they are doing. But ladies, you are doing what you're doing, and a large proportion of you are doing that, and it's very wrong. You may hate your husband, and we do know that there are a number of men that play the same games, and the same message is for you. It's a smaller number, but it's there. You have a responsibility to your children. If you want to hate, dislike, disrespect your partner, that's entirely up to you. But your children have a right to that parent, and they have a right to that love. And when you break that away from them, you are destroying not only your ex-partner, and you are destroying them, you are destroying your child. And your child is more likely to take drugs, more likely to be homeless, more likely to fail in school, more likely to go to prison. Your child is more likely to die 10 years younger. This is how powerful what you are doing is affecting your children's lives. Now, your children, as soon as your children reach 18, you don't have to have anything to do with your partner. You're free. You're completely free. And it's your job, Islamically, it's your job to exercise patience, kindness, self-respect and respect for others. That is your job. That is what you need to do. And in terms of your parenting, you need to exercise them even more. One of the things that I'm a therapist, so one of the things I know is that most relationships through the early breakup, there is a mourning period, okay? You are, even when you are the person that chose to end that relationship, you will mourn. It's like a death. You go through lots of experiences, lots of emotions, guilt, shame, sadness. Even if you wanted it, you will be sad that relationship didn't live its dreams. But that passes. It lasts maybe 2 or 3 years, and then it starts to pass. The emotion leaves you. Your job is to get through that for your children. And for me, otherwise you're creating broken families. Your child is more likely to go through a divorce, to go through the exact same thing that you are putting them through with their own children. So there's lots of outcomes. And for me, you can tell I get really passionate about it. I think to myself, and when I'm being really strong, I'm like, listen, you made your choices. And I get really, you made your choices. I know it's hard, I know it's sad, I know it's difficult, I know it's awful, but that's your job. That's your job for your child. So sit up, take a deep breath, find somebody to support you and get the job done. That's it. You know, so yeah, sorry, I see the children. I see how broken they are, being dragged through family court, how they go, they get destroyed. These kids are destroyed, and it's wrong.
So, I mean, we've spoken about a lot of stuff here. I mean, men are oppressed, you know, in
services, in terms of services.
In different services and legislation.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many statistics where you know men are suffering, but the spotlight is elsewhere. You spoke about parental alienation. You spoke a bit about feminism. And the reaction to kind of extreme feminism. I feel like the sisters have taken a bit of a battering in this episode, but just to kind of, as a final nail in the coffin, what's your message to our young sisters watching or listening?
Okay.
You know, when it comes to these narratives and feminism, or
so for me, it's the belief that women don't need this narrative. They don't need feminism. Women are beautiful. They're beautiful, powerful individuals. They're articulate. They're very clever at looking at everybody within their life. They don't need a group to join. What they need is to believe in themselves. And when you feel like you need to belong to something that is an ideology like feminism, what it's doing is it's stripping away your individuality. It's telling you that you're going to be suppressed, you're going to be a victim, you're going to struggle throughout your life, when the actual fact is you're not. You have gateways into every avenue that you want. You have education, you have health, you have people that are going to listen to you. It's an illusion that they're not going to. And this is why I get really passionate about it. Buying into the feminist narrative, your responsibility as a young woman is to check out your stats. Don't believe what you're being told. Don't believe what I'm telling you. Don't believe what anybody tells you. Check it out for yourself. The biggest crime that society and academia is making, when it says that women don't have equality, it is not using comparative statistics to look at what does equality mean. Because when you say women don't have equality, okay, equality in what? Because currently there's more women and girls in education, there's more women and girls having support with domestic abuse, there's more women and girls having their health checked and taken care of. They're not comparing where the men and boys are in that situation. And for me, for the young sisters coming up there, these girls they've got massive hearts. They want to make a difference in the world. We'll do it from a place of truth. Don't do it from some illusion where you've got some hierarchical ideology that's stepping on you just so they can have their power and their control. And listen to your own truth. Feel yourself and develop yourself. You don't need somebody else holding your hand and moving you through the world. You have everything you need inside you, and every door is open for you. So, it's not that I'm down on women. I actually believe in women. They don't need that ideology. I'm 58 now. I've had a career in lots of different ways. I've never hit a ceiling, never had a door shut in my face, I want to do something, I get up and I go and do it. That's it. Nobody tells me no.
Yeah.
You see?
I mean, I'll end on a funny thing I heard some women's liberation kind of activists say. They said, we worked hard in this country getting kind of success after success against men, right to own property, right to vote, equal pay at work. Just when we're about to, hit the pinnacle, men have turned around and said, we're women too.
Well,
so I suppose that thing's gonna, the kind of gender ideology and new narratives about that are gonna probably change things up now. If you're saying women and men are oppressed, they could just identify as women now and maybe get access to those services.
Well, I think
that's one way of going about it.
I think the worst crime on the planet is to call a gender a victim. I would never call men victims. What I know is that services do not serve them the same way. And I do know that young women that have grown this voice in school and all of that, I do believe that if they knew the truth, they would not allow this to happen. They would, their brothers, their grandfathers, their fathers, men that they fantasize about loving and marrying, they would not want this for them. Yeah. So this is why they need to build this individual voice and not lean on an ideology.
Excellent. And on that point, we have a brief kind of campaign coming up soon called The Power of the Muslim Woman. We haven't kind of finalize the title here, but it's about basically championing those features and the true powers of a Muslim woman from the lens of the Quran and the Sunnah and Islamic kind of discourse, not kind of trying to see women's empowerment through imitating a man or doing what men do, but actually looking at what their strengths are and being proud of those strengths that Allah created in them.
What an amazing campaign, because one of the things that I promote is that men have a lot of really beautiful positive attributes, and so do women, and when you lay them side by side, they actually make something that's whole. The ability of a man mentally, physically and emotionally, and the ability of a woman mentally, physically, emotionally, those skill set, when you put that together in anything, and it's you grow a positive relationship, there's nothing that can stop you achieving something for your family or your community. So amazing campaign.
Well done. Thank you very much, Sister Sally-Anne, for coming, and thank you very much for joining. If you like this podcast, give it a like and a share, and let us know in the comments below. If you agree, disagreed, if you want to get into any fights, in the comments below with anyone. I've been your host Salman, but this has been Sister Sally-Anne from Split the Difference. That is she's a founder of Split the Difference, a human rights organisation that looks to address inequalities in legislation, guidance and policy for men and boys. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.